Hello, everyone, and good morning. Thanks for joining us today for part 3 in our series of talks on recognizing impermanence. This morning, here with Bhante Suddhaso, who will be sharing some words of Dhamma with us. If at any time you have questions, please feel free to type them into the live chat, and Bhante will address them at the end of his talk. And welcome to Geeta as well as Michael. And Michael says he's been listening to the evening talks on YouTube in the morning and that he's sorry to hear about your less than perfect toenail. So at this time, we can pass things over to Bhante Suddhaso, and we'll go from there.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Good morning, friends. So we're continuing to explore this theme of recognizing impermanence. And the truth is, I've already said pretty much everything there is to say. So at this point, I'm just going to start repeating myself a lot with minor variations. But realistically, that's all I've been doing for the past 10 years anyway. Because when we come right down to it, the Dhamma is not complicated. The Dhamma is actually quite straightforward. What makes it complicated is our own internal complication. What makes the Dhamma seem complicated is that we spin all of our stories around it. We wrap in all of our delusions and justifications. We wrap in all of our concepts and ideas, our opinions. And that's what makes things seem complicated. So once again, the reality of the situation is actually quite straightforward. Every moment is completely new. Every moment is completely fresh. Nothing persists from one moment to the next. And that's it. But we build stories. We build stories of ongoing, persistent people who have ongoing experiences, ongoing personalities, who have possessions possessions which have ongoing existence of their own, and so on. And we really like these stories, so we keep telling ourselves these stories over and over and over again. We believe these stories because we like them, we believe them. And this creates dukkha. So there's a very short sutta quote, which I mentioned earlier. So Ayasoma was telling me that this morning I have to talk about the suttas. And I told her that that's not going to happen. And she's like, Dai, come on, talk about the suttas. And I'm like, okay, I'll quote the suttas. And the quote that came to mind, it's very short, it's 4 words long. Yad anicca tang dukkha. So what is impermanent is dukkha. So whatever is impermanent is unsatisfying. It's uncomfortable. But what makes it uncomfortable is not the fact that it's impermanent. What makes it uncomfortable is the fact that we believe it isn't impermanent. What makes it unsatisfying is not its impermanence. What makes it unsatisfying is that we expect the impermanent to be permanent. We're expecting stability from that which is unstable. We're expecting certainty from that which is unpredictable. This is what makes it uncomfortable and unsatisfying. In and of itself, things are neither dukkha nor sukha. They're neither painful nor pleasant. Things just are what they are. But we make it one way or the other. We make it pleasant or unpleasant because of our expectations, because of our preferences, because of our opinions. So recognizing impermanence, it's recognizing the reality of each moment. It's recognizing that what we're experiencing right now, in this very moment, has already changed. The moment we turn to look at our experience, it's already gone. This means that the ordinary person is living a few steps removed from their actual experience. They're living a few steps removed from reality. They're living in a memory of something that happened a few moments ago. So the ordinary person is always a few paces out of step with reality. They're always living maybe a few fractions of a second, at least a few fractions of a second out of step with reality. So then in recognizing impermanence, one of the first critical steps is to come fully into the present moment. So the practice of mindfulness of the present moment, bringing the mind firmly into a direct experience of now. So then in practicing the recognition of impermanence, it's good to start with developing mindfulness and also with developing samadhi. So the more stable the mind is, the more clearly we can see things as they are. The Buddha says this quite clearly. He says, samahitang chittang yatabhutang jnanadasanam. So the concentrated mind knows and sees things as they really are. So a very simple statement. So when the mind is collected, unified, concentrated, then it's capable of knowing and seeing this moment with clarity and precision. So we start with developing mindfulness, so cultivating an interest in our present moment experience. And developing a sharp, precise awareness of our present moment experience. And for this to be possible, it's necessary to relinquish our coarser desire and aversion. So as long as we're caught up in wanting, well, wanting is about being focused on the future. Wanting is about imagining some future where things are better and imagining that that future is going to come if we just wish for it hard enough. So wanting, desire, it's fixation on the future. So it's missing the present moment. And aversion. Similarly, aversion is not wanting to be here with the present moment. It's like, well, I don't like this. I hate this. I want this to be different. So aversion also is antithetical to an experience of the present moment. So either we're grabbing for the future or we're pushing away the present. So that's desire and aversion. And both are antithetical to present moment awareness. So in cultivating mindfulness of our present experience and cultivating this sharp, clear awareness of our current moment, it's necessary to let go of desire and aversion. And desire and aversion are both based on delusion, by the way. They're both based upon the false idea, one, that there is such a thing as the future in the first place. Has anybody ever actually experienced the future? Anybody? No? Never? Well, I've got some news for you. You never will. You will never experience the future, ever. Because you only ever experience the now. You only ever experience the present moment. You can never experience the future. It's always, always, always just a dream, just an imagining, an illusion. There is no such thing as the future. There never has been, there never will be. It's impossible. So this shows the absurdity of trying to live in the future. You can't. There's no way it can ever be. So we recognize that. We recognize that desire and aversion are built upon this delusion that there is such a thing as the future. When in reality, all we have is this present moment, this now, right here. Or what we do is we start running back into the past. We start getting wrapped up in memories or nostalgia. Well, that also is built on delusion, the delusion that the past was real. Well, what is the past? The past is just a memory occurring in the present moment. So once again, we're back to the present moment. There is a memory, and it's here in the present moment. So one way you can kind of snap this back is whenever you notice yourself wandering off into desire for the future, you just remind yourself that that desire is happening in the present moment. That concept of future is happening in the present moment, which means you're still in the present moment, by the way. And the same, when the mind starts running back to the past, caught up in memories or nostalgia, then you remind yourself, well, this memory is happening in the present moment. This concept of the past is happening in the present moment. I'm still in the present moment. I've never left the present moment. The present moment is still the only real thing. It's actually not quite real, but it approximates reality. Almost. So we're starting to train the mind to see the present moment as the only thing that's worth focusing on. To see the present moment with sincere interest. So to see the present moment as something which is worth being fascinated by. And the reason for that is because, once again, it's the only real thing, or almost real thing, that we have access to. So it's a bit like if you walk into a pastry shop and you look in the display case, and there's these 3 lovely looking pastries. And you ask the clerk, and the clerk tells you that, well, actually the one on the left and the one on the right are both just plastic models. They look like pastries, but they're actually just plastic models that are there to look good. And only the one in the middle is actually a real pastry. Well, if you're hungry, which one are you going to get? Which one are you going to be interested in? Are you going to order the plastic model on the left or the right and try to eat it? Of course not. That would be ridiculous. You'll get the one in the middle, and you'll eat the one in the middle. Well, it's the same. The past and the future are just these plastic replicas, these fake imitations in our mind. So why would we waste our time with them? They're not real. They have no ability to satisfy us. Just as a plastic model of a pastry is not going to satisfy your hunger. It doesn't do you any good. Only the actual real pastry can satisfy your hunger. In the same way, only the present moment has any value. Only the present moment has anything approaching reality. So it's the only thing that's worth being interested in, the only thing that's worth being fascinated with. And we come to it with a few particular attitudes. One very important attitude is equanimity. So this resolution of imperturbability, of unshakability, this resolution that whatever the present moment holds, we will face it with dignity and serenity. This resolution that we will face the contents of this moment without shrinking away, without ignoring. We'll take it exactly as it is. We'll see it on its own terms. Another very important element that's related to that is the element of acceptance. So it's accepting that this moment is what it is. So one of the problems that often arises in people who have very traumatic experiences is that often they're not willing to accept what happened. They're not willing to accept that that terrible thing which they thought would never happen actually did happen. So then there can be a very long period of time before the person eventually comes to accept that actually, yeah, that did happen. The unthinkable was in fact thinkable. The unacceptable actually did occur. Well, so, and then that can create all kinds of psychological disturbances. When we're not willing to accept the reality that we're presented with, then what do? Well, either we switch off or we summon up an alternate reality in our mind and try to dwell in that alternate reality instead. So neither one of these is remotely useful from a Buddhist perspective. In fact, both reactions are extremely destructive. Both reactions are fueling ignorance and delusion. So we need to be willing to accept whatever reality presents to us in each moment and recognize that that could be absolutely anything. From the most terrible to the most sublime. It can be absolutely anything. And also recognizing that in and of itself, whatever the present moment is presenting is actually neither terrible nor sublime. It just is what it is. So we set aside our reactive habits and we accept this moment to be just what it is. So in this way, then, we can start to be ready to face the experience of impermanence. And the reason for this is because something which most people would find absolutely horrifying, for example, would be their entire body disintegrating. Anybody here excited by the thought of their entire body disintegrating? I'm talking to Buddhists, so this doesn't, I'm kind of talking to the wrong audience here. But still, it's noticeable that only half the people in the room said yes. So most people are actually not terribly thrilled by the idea of their body disintegrating, but I've got some bad news for you. It already is. Every single moment, your entire body disintegrates. Every single moment. It's happening all the time. And the only reason why that's not the immediate experience of most people is because they're unwilling to accept that. They're unwilling to face the reality that their body disintegrates every single moment. Another reality that most people are unwilling to accept is the reality that the mind is discontinuous. So we think of the mind as this persistent, continuous stream of consciousness. That's not the case. In fact, we know it's not the case. Most of us sleep at night. So we know that at least once every however often you sleep. So most people, that's about every 16 hours or so. So 16 hours of wakefulness, 8 hours of sleeping. 16 hours of almost a wakefulness anyway. Semi-wakefulness. So out of every 24 hours, we spend about 8 of it asleep. And what happens when we fall asleep? There's a discontinuity in consciousness, a discontinuity in the mind's functioning, a discontinuity in mental self-awareness. So we know it happens. We've just come to accept that it happens under the condition of sleeping. But in actuality, it's happening every single moment. Every single moment, the mind appears and disappears. We think of the mind as a continuous, ongoing flow, but that's not our actual experience. But the actual experience is so horrifying to the average person that they're not willing to face it. And when we're not willing to accept it, then that's not our experience. We're dwelling in an alternate reality. An alternate reality with bodies that persist forever until one day we look in the mirror and, how strange, I have gray hair. How can this be? I'm this beautiful young man. Why do I have gray hair and wrinkles? I don't have wrinkles, of course. So gray hair and wrinkles, how can this possibly be? And again, the way it can possibly be is because we've been living in an alternate reality of our own imagining for the past 10 years. An alternate reality in which the body doesn't change, definitely doesn't age. So we're unwilling to accept the changing of the body, the disintegration of the body in every moment, and we're especially unwilling to accept the discontinuity of the mind. So even those who recognize that the body is constantly changing and not who they really are, usually think the mind is who they really are. Usually that's our fallback. We're like, oh, of course, I'm not that coarse, disgusting lump of flesh. Of course, that's not me. No, I am this bright, radiant consciousness that persists for all eternity. Well, let's be realistic. No, that's not what we are. It's just something which comes and goes like everything else. So look at your experience. Moments of discontinuity, of breaks in the conscious experience. And the more closely you look at the mind, the more you realize it's a staccato. It's not a flow, it's a staccato. It's moment after moment after moment of like, whoa, here I am. Whoa, here I am. Whoa, here I am again. And that's not a problem. It's just the way things are. So we can relax into this. We can relax into the experience of the disintegration of the body and the discontinuity of the mind. Because there's nothing wrong with that. It's been going along all along. This is what's been happening. All along, this has been our experience. We've just been unwilling to face it because we want to believe that reality is other than that. We want to believe that reality is something different. So we need to be willing to accept this possibility and to really face our experience and see what's going on. So to set aside our assumptions and beliefs about reality, to set aside our opinions and desires about reality, and open up to whatever reality actually is. So as I mentioned yesterday, the recognition of impermanence is not an imposition. It's not something that we impose on reality. The recognition of impermanence is what arises naturally when we stop imposing on reality, when we stop projecting on reality. So developing the recognition of impermanence is not really a doing so much as a cessation. It's a cessation of assumption, a cessation of opinion, a cessation of perception, a cessation of projection, so that the underlying reality becomes undeniably clear. Yeah, so once again, we need to be willing to set aside whatever we think reality is. There's a really lovely line in the suttas where the Buddha says, whatever you think reality is, the truth is different than that. A very simple statement. So it's coming to terms with this simple fact that if we want to know what reality is, we need to stop telling reality what we think it is and listen, look, feel what's actually going on, what's the actual experience. And what we find is that there's layers and layers and layers of belief and opinion in the mind. And those layers and layers and layers of belief and opinion are what build up this apparent experience of a solid, persistent body inhabited by a continuous mind. So we need to be willing to really closely look at those beliefs and opinions that we have. That deep set belief in permanence, persistence, and stability. We need to look at that and be willing to strip it away, to discard it. To stop expecting reality to be any particular way and open up to what it actually is. So I think I've said plenty for now. So once again, we're getting into the point where I'm just going to be repeating myself with minor variations over and over again in the vain hope that one of us will understand, hopefully me. I'm hoping I'll understand too one of these days. So at this time, if you have any questions or comments, please go ahead and put them in and I'll answer as best I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And good morning to some more friends joining in. Edward, Lisa, Anthony, Mark, and we have a couple comments and questions. So Lisa says, good morning. Last night you suggested reading all the suttas. Do you suggest a translation or a collection? I've heard of Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation through wisdom.
Well, actually, I recommend learning Pali and reading them in Pali. Pali is actually not a terribly difficult language. Normally people start laughing when I say this. Aya started rolling her eyes, but she rolls her eyes a lot, so it's never quite sure what that means. Yeah, that's actually what I recommend. Learn Pali. Not a terribly difficult language. I learned it in 1 year. Which actually, I guess that'd probably make it a category 3, category 2, category 3. Yeah, so category 1 languages you can learn in 3 months. I think category 2 is 1 year. Anyway, it's not a terribly difficult language, highly recommended. It makes the suttas so much deeper and richer. That said, if you're not currently interested in that kind of commitment, then yeah, Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations are pretty good. You can also get Bhante Suddhaso's translations on suttacentral.net. Those are the main ones I recommend these days. Yeah. For the short poetic collections, there's some other translations available, but I don't recommend starting with those. So things like the Dhammapada and the Sutta Nipata and so on, I don't recommend starting there. I recommend starting with the prose suttas, middle-length discourses, connected discourses, numerical discourses. Start with that. Okay.
Okay. And then Geeta is sharing that she registered for a retreat with Bhante Bodhi starting tomorrow evening.
Great.
So she'll have to miss our retreat and catch up later.
That's fine.
Yes, yeah, competing retreats is not a bad thing in Buddhism.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I hope things go well for you with Bhante Bodhi's retreat.
Okay. And then Michael says, within thorough acceptance of whatever comes along, realizing that whatever happens is impermanent, how do we react to war, pestilence, police injustice, etc.? We speak and act against them while accepting them as this moment's reality. How do we react to these evils while at the same time accepting them at this moment?
Yeah, so you accept what's present and you do something about it. So these things are not in conflict. So accepting the reality of the present moment doesn't prevent you from doing something. In fact, accepting the reality of the present moment gives you clarity about what's happening. So undisturbed, non-reactive clarity about what's happening. And the serenity and focus to make the best choice and to carry through with that choice as well as you can. So acknowledging and accepting the present moment, yeah, that does mean accepting that there is currently terrible things happening. We accept that. And we also recognize that's not good. And we also recognize we can do something about it. And we do something about it. So it's really, really important to recognize that one of the critical characteristics of an awakened being is infinite compassion. And that infinite compassion manifests in action. It manifests in doing things. And actually tangibly doing something to help others, to be of benefit to others. So there's this peculiar misunderstanding which is in circulation, this misunderstanding that an awakened being just like sits quietly in a cave and then dies. And I don't know where this comes from because it's not in the suttas. In the suttas, we see awakened beings that still go around trying to help others, doing what they can to be of benefit to others. In fact, that was the Buddha's whole life. The Buddha attained awakening and then he spent the rest of his life helping other people. That was what he did because that was the motivation of his mind. His mind was resolved upon helping others. Because for an awakened being, nothing else makes sense except to be of benefit to the world. There's no other course of action that's reasonable. It's kind of like a healthy body. So a healthy body supports itself. It nourishes itself. It takes care of itself. So it's the same. An awakened being naturally takes care of other beings because they recognize there's no difference. There's no separation. There's no boundary. So the realization of not self naturally incorporates a boundless compassion, a limitless benevolence, which manifests in doing tangible things for the benefit of others. Okay.
Okay. And then Gita asks, Bhante, doesn't the eighth state of consciousness keep flowing? Our CPU storage is all of our past lives, etc.
You're referring to the Alaya Vijnana. In English, it's usually translated storehouse consciousness. Does that keep flowing? Well, you can say that if you like, but recognize that. So yesterday I used the metaphor of the flowing stream as a demonstration that every moment is completely new. So like there's the old saying in English, you can never step in the same river twice. So what's that pointing to? It's pointing to the fact that even if you put your foot in what seems to be the same place, in actuality, every single drop of water is different. It looks like the same river, but actually every moment it's a different set of water drops. So in that sense, it's actually a completely new river in every moment. So it's the same, Alaya Vijnana. There's the illusion of continuity, but actually the Alaya Vijnana also is new in every moment because it's changing in every moment. The contents of the Alaya Vijnana is directly related to the contents of one's active consciousness as well. So whatever is in active consciousness is therefore not in the Alaya Vijnana. Whatever's in the Alaya Vijnana is not in the active consciousness. So these are a set pair. They're always functioning together. So then that also means that both of them are in this constant dance of appearing and disappearing, shifting and changing. Okay.
And Gita has a follow-up to that. With meditation and practice, can we not reach this eighth state of consciousness to clearly see the Four Noble Truths?
So it's always present, whether you're aware of it or not. So yeah, through cultivating Buddhist practice, we can start to become aware of the subconscious patterns of mind and subconscious tendencies of mind. And you can even start to become aware of your old karma. It's lurking somewhere far beneath the surface. Yeah.
Okay. And then Mark says, I don't understand why you say the body is continuously disintegrating, as this is not scientific. Yes, body changes quite often, and some parts more often than others. And yes, we get old, but what you say seems too extreme.
Study some quantum physics. Next question. Quantum physics will blow your mind. These days, there's a lot of books out which are designed to help non-scientists start to get some understanding of what the heck quantum physics is saying. But briefly speaking, there is nothing solid anywhere, and there's nothing continuous anywhere. Reality, as far as quantum physicists can tell, reality is made up of a bunch of little tiny things that just magically pop in and out of existence all the time, randomly. But that happens so often and on such a large scale that when you get to the macroscopic level of human bodies, things seem to be relatively predictable and continuous. But on a subatomic level, nothing could be farther from the truth. On a subatomic level, it's a bunch of little tiny, whatever they are, spontaneously and randomly appearing and disappearing all the time. So actually, modern science would be in complete agreement with Buddhism on this one, that all physical things disintegrate every single moment. Okay.
And Michael says, I suppose if we're living in the moment rather than the past or future, we are free to react to what's happening right now.
Mhm.
The question is, how do I explain this to others?
Just like that. That was pretty good, actually. Yeah.
Okay. And Bobby is just thanking you for the talk. NSV says, I read Bhikkhu Bodhi's Pali Canon book in an informal study group. It was very helpful to gain perspective that way. They're probably referring to
In the Buddha's words.
in the Buddha's words, because Bhikkhu Bodhi has multiple Pali Canon books.
Yeah, the book In the Buddha's Words, it's an anthology from each of the major collections of suttas. That's a great place to start. Bhikkhu Bodhi did a really good job of picking a small number of suttas that give kind of a logical progression of understanding of the core concepts of Buddhism. So he picked suttas which are pretty accessible and easy to understand and see how they fit together. So that's a great place to start, but don't end there. So often when somebody is really new to the suttas, I'll recommend that first they read Bhikkhu Bodhi's anthology called In the Buddha's Words, to read that cover to cover, then to start with reading the full sutta collections cover to cover. Some people, if they just start directly with the sutta collections, they get bored or confused or both. But starting with the anthology will kind of prime the mind to appreciating the suttas. Okay.
Okay. And Michael also says, on the note of Pali study, as a language teacher, I'd also like to say that whether a language is difficult or not depends on the learner in many senses.
Yeah, and also I'd add to that the single most important quality for learning a language is dedication. It doesn't matter whether it's difficult or easy, doesn't matter whether it takes a long time or a short time. A student who is dedicated will learn. A student who is not dedicated will not learn. That's really it. So the past, almost 3 years now, I've been studying Chinese. Wow. But when I started, I knew this was going to be a long-term project. I actually told myself this is going to take me 10 years. 10 years before I really know Chinese. And I was like, well, in that case, I better be dedicated, because if I screw up and I'm not dedicated enough, then it's going to be 20 years. And that would be a nightmare. And if I'm not dedicated, it's going to be 50 years. And I'm going to die without ever actually knowing this bloody language. But if I'm dedicated, I can get it in 10 years or less. So the most important thing for language study is dedication. Resolve on studying a little bit every day, if possible. When I learned Pali, the way I learned Pali was I just made a deal with myself. I said, I am going to study for at least 20 minutes a day. 20 minutes a day of Pali. And in a year, I knew Pali. But it was that dedication, that unrelenting resolve that no matter what, I'll do my 20 minutes a day. Okay.
Great. And Michael and Gita say thank you for your answers. Bobby asks, do Pacceka Buddhas teach on a lesser scale than a Sammasambuddha, or do they just stay in a cave until they die?
So there's actually very little information about Pacceka Buddhas. There's not much in the suttas that goes into any great description of them. There's a little bit more in the Mahayana canon, but even there's not much description. So my understanding is that a Pacceka Buddha is somebody who attains awakening, but they don't have the ability to teach. So they still manifest compassion in whatever way they can. But what they're not able to do is to manifest compassion through teaching the Dhamma. They can do other things, but they can't do that. This is quite reasonable. There are people who can be an expert on a subject, but be utterly incompetent at teaching it. There can be people who they themselves have a skill, but they can't explain to anybody else how to do it. So that's a Pacceka Buddha. So they still manifest compassion. They just don't do it through teaching Dhamma because that's not a skill set that they've developed. Okay.
And Lisa also says thank you for the sutta study suggestions. And then Michael is also just pointing out that people be aware of their capacities. So he says, I agree on dedication, just meant to say that those with learning difficulties shouldn't hold it against themselves.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be easier for some people and harder for others. That's inevitable. That's unavoidable. But give it a shot. I've met far too many people who they started learning Pali and then they gave up because they're like, well, it's too hard. And it's like, yeah, but did you learn anything? And they're like, well, I learned the meaning of a few words. Great, so you learned something. So if you keep learning stuff, then someday you'll know enough to be able to read Pali. That's great. It might take a few decades, but big deal. It might take a few lifetimes even, but big deal, you'll get there. The only way to guarantee failure is to not try. So make the effort. Okay,
and that was the last comment / question. So if anybody has anything else, now's the time. Otherwise, we'll wrap up for the morning. Tomorrow or tonight, actually, we'll be continuing our series of talks on recognizing impermanence. So join us at 7:30 for some chanting, meditation, and another Dhamma talk from Bhante Suddhaso. And then tomorrow will be the final parts, part 5 and part 6 at 8 a.m. and then again at 7:30 p.m. So join us then if you can. Cam and Robin also popped in at the last moment. They were probably here the whole time, but they're saying thank you, Bhante. And Michael says, absolutely, give it a shot. I'm inspired by your words. So with that, we can end for the morning with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
And thanks for joining us, and we will see you later. Have a great day.